Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to our webinar. Today, we're going to finish our sessions off with a return to sport best practices. So, we've got Donna Goguen today from Lacrosse, New Brunswick, or Nova Scotia. I always say that New Brunswick and Nova Scotia mix those up a lot. Donna's the executive director of Lacrosse Nova Scotia and a longtime volunteer in both hockey and lacrosse. She's also a sport administrator who's committed to providing youth and adults of all genders the opportunity to participate in sport for life, particularly lacrosse. And Donna has recently taken on a leading role with the Gender Equity Working Group at Lacrosse Canada. Welcome, Donna. I'm just going to make you the host so you can turn your video on. Hi, Donna.
Hi.
How are you today?
How are you? I'm fine. How are you?
Good, good. Just have a number of questions here for you to kind of get things going. I guess the best thing would be, can you just walk us through what your return to play in Nova Scotia's look like? I know there's different areas of the province and probably different restrictions in different places, but in general, what does return to play look like for you?
For us here in Nova Scotia, actually, it wasn't, it was complicated at the beginning, and we had to submit a return to play plan that was approved by the provincial government through public health. And, there were a number of restrictions, and we've gone through shutdowns over time and gone back and forth across our phases, but in general, we managed to negotiate the ability to have our athletes play, and looked a little bit different. And our shutdown times were not at the most opportune time, but we persevered and managed to at least have some seasons.
So you mentioned that you had a few shutdowns. So each time that you would return, were the parameters and guidelines still the same then?
They would be adjusted. So we had phases 1 to 4, 4 being back to normal. So we would go back and forth between phase 1 and phase 3 a fair amount. Right now, we're actually in phase 3 because Nova Scotia is not completely reopened, and in principle should around October 4th, depending on where things are with our 4th wave. And I found really in Nova Scotia, we were the tail end of every one of the waves that you saw come across the country. So technically, we did have the ability, at least in summer, to have a box season because the provincial government, through public health, did allow some requests for increased numbers indoors to be approved for our sport, particularly so that we could have a close to normalcy.
So obviously you've had to make some changes with health guidelines and things like that. How have you adapted lacrosse to fit within the parameters of those guidelines then?
Yeah, so we were lucky here in Nova Scotia in the sense that we didn't have to do major adaptation to the box or field as a sport, the sport itself. We were restricted to only offering skills and drills programs for a number of months until we reached the phase where we were allowed to have enough participants with it, especially indoors in the arenas, to try to do some meaningful game-like play. So we went through stages where we could only do skills and drills. We actually had to separate into cohorts of 10, including coaches, keep them separated on the floor, manage participants coming into and out of different doors in arenas, no spectators. So I think that's similar to, most provinces in Canada had to figure out the logistics of moving people safely and keeping people separated.
Mm-hmm. So what has the general feedback been from players, parents, coaches with regard to the measures that have been taken?
Generally, we have been lucky. We haven't had a lot of pushback. We did have some concerns in the parent groups about not allowing spectators. When we did reopen and we were allowed spectators this summer, we still had to restrict the number, and that creates a little bit cause for concern. We really haven't had any complaints from the athletes. I think they were just glad to be able to participate in the sport regardless of how it looked, even if it seemed a little bit different. And from the coaches, we really didn't have much pushback either. I mean, there's always a few causes for concern where we did require them to wear masks on the benches, for example, during game scenarios. So that, there was a few complaints about that, but in general, people understood that, the most important thing was the safety of everybody concerned. So generally speaking, we had, really good cooperation.
That's great. Now, were there any adaptations that had to be made for you mentioned gameplay and whatnot? Was there anything with like no touch from the referees, or you changed face-off situations, anything like that?
Yeah, generally we didn't have to do much adaptation there. We did keep balls separately. There were just some issues surrounding. We didn't adapt it in terms of having, we could still have face-offs, but generally they did do a little bit of adaptation to try to keep the play moving, as opposed to having too many opportunities where, anybody would have to get too close to each other. So, generally we didn't have to make a lot of adaptations at all.
Well, that's good. Now, I know last time I was down in Halifax that we were actually out in an outdoor box. Are there a number of outdoor boxes, or is this just the one that we were kind of at?
There's probably maybe 3.
Okay.
Generally, we don't play games at the outdoor boxes, but they did, before we were allowed to go back inside the arenas, some of our teams who have outdoor boxes in the geographic area that they're in did make use of the outdoor boxes for sure. So because they could have more larger cohorts in an outdoor box in some phases than they could have indoors.
Right. So you've been around the game for a while, so you've seen from season to season to season for a number of years, and obviously COVID's created a lot of problems and issues. I'm from a coaching perspective, I'm thinking a silver lining here might be, you talked about sticks and skills and skill drills and things like that. What of the skills, when you've seen the kids back out playing, have those been a little bit better and a little bit sharper? Because even though they didn't have an opportunity to play, they had to focus on that for that time. How has the impact of that gone, and what's the feedback been from coaches about that?
Yeah, I think definitely we actually did really well with our Canada Games group recently at a tournament in New Brunswick, and that was a bit of a surprise, but it really reinforced the fact that we were able through the pandemic to have intermittent play and we did very specific off-season play whenever we could fit it within the outbreak times. So our kids have been on, like, of all age groups, we looked for gaps and we tried to provide off-season programming to fill the gap, knowing that we wanted to make sure that kids had sticks in hands as much as possible through the entire pandemic whenever public health measures allowed. So we saw the benefit of that in that particular program because they did really well at the tournament. And we know for sure that that was directly because they had an opportunity to be on the floor for the better part of the pandemic. It also similar in terms of the team play that happened this summer, where realistically we lost a percentage of registration because we lost our spring season due to a shutdown. But the kids that were back and playing definitely had a better skill level. The kids that actually came to our off-season programming last fall and winter. So, the coaches did take notice of that. And even the clubs themselves, the kids that took advantage of those programs have done better in terms of the success of their clubs in league play last summer too. And some of the club presidents have mentioned that benefit for sure.
Great, that's awesome news to hear. So throughout all of this, what has been the biggest challenge in terms of, or I guess we know the challenges with COVID in terms of shutdowns, but I guess what is the challenge in terms of trying to retain or grow the game again, in terms of getting players back out? How have you kind of gone about working on that?
So here in Nova Scotia, of course, we don't have high numbers to start with. We're a small sport here. However, a few things that we did tackle successfully is sourcing funding, particularly to help create programming for underserved populations. So one of the things that I did spearhead as the executive director of Lacrosse Nova Scotia is looking for funding opportunities, and identified Jumpstart Sport Relief Fund as a primary source for us. I wrote a number of grants, and we were able to do programs that we would not have had opportunities to do if the pandemic didn't happen. So it's ironic in some ways, but there are sources of funding out there to help sports recover, to help keep sport alive. So I think for smaller sports to take advantage of some of that funding and then reach out to underserved populations and bring them into your sport and give them a positive experience. So we know we've got registration that translated directly from that fall and winter programming. So, that is one of the key benefits that we found, ironically, through the pandemic, that we were able to actually source some funding and reach out.
That's great.
Now, in terms of retaining players, well, from our perspective, just providing programs. We did grassroots programs last winter. We did some high performance programs last winter. And those were all aimed, and we looked at all age groups, adult age groups, masters, the junior age players, minor age players, because we knew we needed that promotion and push to keep them interested in the sport for spring registration. And really, we did very well with it, except that we were at the last wave of the third wave, and the timing was bad for us. But that was the other thing, is just to try to do off-season programming. And that definitely had an impact, and we were able to actually retain a lot of our registrations. That's great.
That's great. So I saw that you were on the last session where we were talking about rugby and beach volleyball and whatnot. How has the 6-on-6 been received in Nova Scotia? Like, of those four categories, I'll say, where do you hear the most comments, I guess?
You know what? I have to admit, we haven't had a lot of talk about it, but we are planning to give it a shot out of curiosity. And it's interesting because when we were on the Sixes Town Hall, it occurred to us, okay, in the off season, we often have our technical director go into schools and do programming. So we thought, okay, well, maybe, we can adapt it a little bit and give it a trial run in gyms out of curiosity. So we do have some plans. We're not, certainly not against anything that's going to grow the sport. And I think the point of it, being a non-contact version of the game or limited contact is very interesting, because here in Nova Scotia, and I found this an interesting discussion too, we already have non-contact modifications to our game here, which we've had for female lacrosse, box lacrosse, for a number of years. And we have modified contact right up to the 10U age group. And what we call it is place and direct. So to try to have kids understand that the game is not to, try to hurt anybody or be overly aggressive. So because for sure, especially those entry-level age groups and the younger age groups, parents do get intimidated by the concept that it is a rougher sport. And we do need to make some modifications to welcome all players into the sport, no matter whether they're, whatever gender that they may be, because it is a great sport. And then, as in any other sport, as you progress through and you develop your skills, if it's a contact sport, then you introduce contact in a measured way. And then I think, hopefully everybody still enjoys playing it and has fun.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when there was a lot of issues with hockey and contact a number of years ago. One of the core questions that they used was, if we remove contact from the game, will it detract from the game or will it make it better? And invariably, the answer came back is it made it better at the youth level. So the question is, for lacrosse, is that same question a fair question to ask at this point?
Well, I even remember back to my hockey volunteering, and I was volunteering through the time where they lowered body checking in the Pee Wee, for example. But even in those days, there was still within the coaching system, there were modifications in terms of teaching kids the progressive way to learn how to properly check. And it wasn't full body checking right from the start. So I think I think the point was made that in coaching, if you build that into your coaching where it's a progressive introduction of contact for specific reasons and purposes, then I think as kids get older and they, acquire that skill set, it's a natural progression to safer body contact, honestly.
Yeah, both American football and rugby have made dramatic changes in the last 10, 15 years to how they deal with contact, and with touch rugby and waist down tackling only. And then I think it's 16 or 17 before you can actually learn to tackle from the chest down in rugby, for instance. And obviously we know of all the concussion issues they've had with football that have, there are a lot of parents that are saying, well, our kids aren't playing because of concussions. And, concussion is, in any contact sport like such as ours, there will be the potential for concussions, but we need to reduce that as much as possible, obviously.
Yeah, well, concussion, we're actually in Nova Scotia, the brain injury a group here, we're having Concussion Awareness Day on September 29th. So we've had a number of posts that I think people will see coming out on social media talking about concussion. And we got some really interesting feedback from athletes, from coaches, and from administrators in lacrosse in our community on experiences with concussion and sometimes the impact. So, we can't be, we've got to make sure that we are cognizant of the fact that, we are a contact sport. I'm not an apologist for it by any stretch, but I think knowing that we have to find a way to introduce contact in a safe way, I think that's the onus of all of us as administrators and for our volunteers to, make sure everybody's safe.
Absolutely. And that, again, going back to our original discussion on return to play is, we wanted to make sure that throughout COVID, we're coming back into playing in a safe environment. And I think there are some lessons that we can learn from what we've been through the last 2 seasons, or non-seasons, I guess we'll say, for some other things, whether it's equipment, whether it's concussions, whether it's, being more aware of our surroundings and how close, having coaches maybe take a better look at their facilities before they're going on the floor for those safety concerns, and making sure our players are always in a safe environment. Any other suggestions you would make to other provinces, barring, their health regulations, on what's been successful for you in Nova Scotia in terms of returning to play?
I'm going to be honest. I think that all of our leadership across the country and everyone I've interacted with have been working so hard and done such a great job taking care of all the different issues that we've dealt with in every province. And every province is different, and some have definitely been hit harder than Nova Scotia has. And there's some common denominators that I think we've all dealt with. I feel a little bit like we've been a little bit luckier here in the maritime provinces in terms of what we've been dealing with. And I don't know that I have, other than to keep communicating, sharing resources, I definitely benefited from the larger MAs in Lacrosse Canada in terms of some of the return to play plans that they were working on at the very beginning. I think it's that cooperation among all of us who, managed to, try to weather the pandemic as successfully as we can as a smaller sport.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the fortunate aspects for us in lacrosse has been to keep us on point. Has been the twofold good news of Canada Summer Games inclusion, and then now more recently our Olympic inclusion, which has, I think, helped keep everybody on point with, hey, we've got a great opportunity here. Let's make the most of it. So it's nice to see that in Nova Scotia that you've done a great job with you and your staff and all your leadership in doing that. I'm just going to reach out to our participants here to see if anyone has any questions for Donna. If you do, please put those in the Q&A box. Give them a minute or so. But yeah, this is, let's see what we have. Anybody?
I think the other thing that when we had shutdowns, that I think probably everybody dealt with this to some degree, is having to try to do things like certifications of coaches and officials. That was a giant challenge for all of our clinicians out there and learning facilitators. So, that, when we had shutdowns, that's what we concentrated our efforts on, see what kind of marketing promotion we could come up with.
Yeah, it's just one of the pandemic just kind of made all of us kind of take a look and reevaluate on how we do things and what our best practices are. And in some ways we struggled in some places, and then in other places we flourished. And coming out of it, I think we're going to be in a much better, more positive place. It doesn't appear that we have any additional questions, Donna. So thank you so much for taking part in this and answering all the questions. I appreciate it.
More than happy to help.
Thank you so much. And so this brings a close to our event today. And I'd like to thank everybody who's participated and made this possible. All of our panelists, our presenters, and our keynote speaker, Glenn, earlier this morning. I'd like to thank everybody and have a great rest of your day. And that the videos should be up on YouTube in the next week or two. Thanks so much. Take care.
Thank you.